I think first and foremost, we need to start with the possible silly season rumours that have come out after just one Grand Prix, in particular about two drivers, Lewis Hamilton and Lando Norris, both of which don't seem very happy in their teams right now, both of which came out after the Bahrain Grand Prix and were criticising their team quite heavily moving into this season and don't look very happy with it at all. So let's talk about Lewis Hamilton first. If we kind of look at the news story that broke, he says he knew from the moment that he drove the car, the W14 would need work. And this comes after Lewis Hamilton was actually looking fairly positive about the 2023 season. Before the season, Mercedes seemed fairly happy with their progress. They seemed fairly happy with where they were moving with this concept. Obviously, they held on to the concept that they had over the last couple of seasons, and they seemed like they were happy with it. But Lewis Hamilton supposedly not. It's no secret that Mercedes are unhappy, as it says, about their performance. And he said that, yeah, I knew from the moment I drove the car where we were, the challenges that we would be facing. On a positive note, we have the bouncing this year as a huge plus, trying to understand what problems were there while still having the bouncing really masks so many of those issues. It makes it difficult to figure out what those are. So obviously he's talking about the porpoising, the fact that last season for him was really hard on him. So we can now focus on pure performance. So I'm encouraged to see that we can focus and encourage everyone in the team. They're so focused on getting us back to the top. We're not where we wanted to start this season naturally, but we're still a multi-championship winning team. And I think that's the thing, right? Lewis Hamilton, at the end of the day, he has won multiple championships with this team. There was another interview he did later on where he said, I've driven so many cars, I know what a car needs. Right? So he came out and he was quite scathing. And I feel like that kind of pointed many people in the direction of Lewis Hamilton maybe had some thoughts and feelings about the 2022 car, possibly even the 2023 car in the Silverstone test that they did, the Bahrain test that they did. And Lewis Hamilton clearly had some ideas of how to make this car better. And he's not quite getting that back from the Mercedes team at this moment in time, which is quite a juxtaposition, right? Because even after the race, he was very positive on the radio, trying to motivate the team massively in the radio as well. But then it comes to a few interviews, a few different bits and pieces that we've now seen in the media. Hamilton feels very frustrated at the moment. Obviously, he wants to win. I think there's still the remnants of that 2021 championship, the fact that he feels still a little bit broken by that 2021 championship. The fact that he didn't manage to pick up that record-breaking 8th world title. The fact that he's still talked about in that same vein with Michael Schumacher. People still doubt whether or not he is the greatest driver of all time. I do think Lewis Hamilton wants that accolade. I do think Lewis Hamilton chases those individual awards, even though it is within a team sport. He gives me that feeling of a driver who is also stat padding himself. You know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, there's a few times where he could have just let Valtteri Bottas win a Grand Prix or let Valtteri Bottas have a pole position where they were looking quite comfortable anyway, but he always tried to get those records and he always kept going throughout the season. I feel like Lewis Hamilton is one of those characters that is chasing those individual accolades within Formula One. And maybe it's just the fact that Mercedes have been a bit stubborn, I would say, in my point of view. I think Mercedes, the fact that they haven't changed direction in 2023, the fact that they seemingly haven't listened to Lewis Hamilton and some of the advice that he wanted to give the team, does put them in this very strange position now, right? Where Lewis Hamilton is frustrated, but Mercedes have decided that the radical change is going to come a little bit late. Like, they've just had the entire winter break to try and sort things out, to change things on the car, to try different setups. And yet, after one Grand Prix, Toto Wolff comes out and says, now is the time for radical change. Surely the time for radical change would have been at the end of the 2022 season, where that car didn't work for the entirety of the 2022 season. You can argue it got quicker and quicker, but then you could also argue that Ferrari kind of got slower over the course of the season. Red Bull had less to fight for, especially towards the end of the season, where Mercedes looked their best. Red Bull didn't really have too much to fight for anymore. And it sort of looked the same going into Bahrain, where Max Verstappen is turning down the engine power, Sergio Perez is turning down the engine power, and still nobody anywhere near him. Whereas many people were talking about Mercedes getting closer to that Red Bull car. George Russell even said after the Grand Prix, he thinks that Red Bull already have the title sewn up. So, like, when you're looking at George Russell, who is the young driver at Mercedes, is the driver that they seemingly want for the future, is kind of this driver that they're looking to build around once Lewis Hamilton starts to slowly decline, that's not a great stance for your main driver of the future to have already in this 2023 season, where with 22 races to go and a year of Formula One driving in front of him, he's already demotivated by the car that he is in. Then it's, where does Hamilton actually go? And I feel like this is where the rumors that circulate kind of fall down a little bit. Lewis Hamilton still has won 8 constructors titles with Mercedes back to back to back. Lewis Hamilton has still won 6 drivers championships with Mercedes. Again, sort of back to back, Nico Rosberg in there as well. But they dominated that entire era of Formula One, and they did so incredibly well. So the links, therefore, are Hamilton to Ferrari, which is the first one that I've seen, which isn't impossible, although it was Simon Lazenby, who's not the most credible of people, who was coming out and kind of fueling the fire when it comes to that. I can see it happening in terms of like a driver to team kind of fit, you know what I mean? Feel like Lewis Hamilton being the driver that he is, Ferrari being the team that they are, it always is going to come back to that, right? It's the possible best driver of all time and statistically the best team of all time. Can they come together in some way and make something happen, even if it is at the end of their career? Kind of like what we saw when Sebastian Vettel moved to Ferrari. There was big hype around that then, right? He was a 4-time world champion. He'd come from Red Bull. He was going to drag Ferrari back to the days of Michael Schumacher in the past. But it didn't quite happen with Sebastian Vettel. Could it happen with Lewis Hamilton? I don't think we'll ever see it. I think it would be fun to see what Lewis Hamilton could do at Ferrari, but I just don't think the puzzle pieces will ever quite fit together 100%. And then obviously it's Aston Martin, which are the second one. Where does Lewis Hamilton fit in there? Is it when Fernando Alonso retires? Fernando Alonso 41 right now, but Lewis Hamilton's 38. Like, it's not like he is lots younger than Fernando Alonso, and therefore Lewis Hamilton slotting in to replace Fernando Alonso still doesn't feel very long term for Aston Martin. And also then you've got Lance Stroll. There is no way that they're going to get Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso back together again. We saw that they were only together for a season at McLaren, and they still hate each other now because of that season at McLaren. That would not work in any way whatsoever, those two in the same Aston Martin team. So I just can't see the move to Aston Martin happening either. I think Lewis Hamilton is going to stay at Mercedes. Then the obviously final thing is Lewis Hamilton retiring. Does he decide to just leave Formula One in its entirety? I can see that happening. I feel like Lewis Hamilton is the kind of guy, a bit like what we saw with Sebastian Vettel last year. I think Lewis Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel, you can draw quite a lot of parallels between them. Sebastian Vettel working on various projects outside of Formula One that kind of synced up with his mindset and his thought process in that Formula One season as well. Lewis Hamilton has the same thing. Lewis Hamilton has so many projects on the sidelines where he could jump into one of those in a bit more detail, or he could go off and do something completely different, whether that's, the fashion stuff that he does, the film stuff that he does. He has so many connections with so many incredible people. I'm sure he'd find something to fill his time with. But if he does still love Formula One, if he does still think that Mercedes can maybe get up there, the 2026 regulations is what people are talking about now for Mercedes. Do they find a way back to the top before then? I don't think so. It's easy to say, right, that Aston Martin have been able to make massive steps forward by looking at the Red Bull car. And if you look at the Mercedes project, if Mercedes just go in right now, okay, say they completely scrap the design that they've got and they just decide to go in and be like, okay, we're going to take the Red Bull design as our core concept. You could either take Red Bull or Ferrari as kind of the core concepts that are available on the Formula One grid right now. Let's say that they take the Red Bull concept. We're just going to completely get rid of that and try this Red Bull setup. That still leaves you second at best, right? There's no way that they're going to be able to completely change their design, go to the Red Bull design, and then make it better than Red Bull already have it when Red Bull have been working with this design for 2 years already. It's just a really strange place for Lewis Hamilton to be right now. He's not going to be able to battle for victories in the way that he wants to. He's not going to be able to battle for that 8th World Championship in the way that he wants to. And maybe this is the time for Lewis Hamilton where if he can't see it happening, And if he doesn't really believe in the team moving into the new regulations in 2026 either, I feel like that's the final roll of the dice for Lewis Hamilton. Like, does he want to just stick around for 2 years to see what happens when it comes to 2026? That's the real question that Lewis Hamilton has to answer. And unfortunately, nobody else can answer that apart from Lewis Hamilton.